It's Friday, November the 15th. From The Economist in London, this is The Week Ahead, a look at some of the stories that will be in the headlines next week. I'm Daniel Franklin, Executive Editor at The Economist.
And I'm Tom Standage, the Digital Editor. In The Week Ahead, Chile holds a presidential election, nuclear talks resume with Iran, Nepal holds parliamentary elections, and Germany's Bundestag holds hearings about American snooping. Daniel, let's start with Chile's presidential election. What's the background and what can we expect?
Well, we can expect the outcome of a victory for Michelle Bachelet, who's been president before. The only real question is whether she wins in an outright majority first time round or whether she has to wait for a runoff in a month's time. But she is expected to win, and then the question will be how far to the left will she move Chile? She is of the left. Chile's actually been doing rather well under the administration of Sebastián Piñera. It has average growth of 5.5% or so. Unemployment is low, but it's a dissatisfied place. The most visible manifestation of that has been the student protests, growing middle class worried about the cost of living, particularly the cost of education. And Michelle Bachelet will come in promising really to do three things. First of all, to make education free for students over time. Secondly, to introduce tax reform. And thirdly, constitutional change. She is, though, quite a consensual person. She's spent much of her time since being president last time round in charge of the UN's Organisation for Women. So I think she'll proceed quite carefully and in a manner that brings in a broad swathe of Chilean society. Tom, turning to Iran, talks resume of the P5, the Permanent 5+1. What are they likely to deliver?
Well, they almost did a deal last time. So after years and years of not getting anywhere about Iran and its nuclear program, which it insists is for civilian use, but the rest of the world doesn't believe it, there's been this remarkable turnaround in the past few months following the election of a far more moderate president in Iran, thawing of relations with the US, and the most recent round of talks, which ended in Geneva on November the 10th, even involved John Kerry, America's Secretary of State, flying in. There was widespread optimism that they would do a deal, but at the last minute it didn't quite happen. So the big question really is, was that just a stumble, and will they get to a deal this time? Or are there in fact divisions within the Western powers over the deal? And the outline of the deal seems to be that Iran would accept that it would restrict its enrichment activities. It wouldn't turn on a whole bunch of new centrifuges that it's got lined up. It would also hand over some of its more highly enriched uranium, or at least put it under monitoring. It would agree not to fuel its new reactor at Arak, which would be capable of producing plutonium, and in return it would be allowed to sell some oil on the market. And the sanctions against Iran are really hurting it very badly, costing it several billion dollars a month. What seems to have happened, though, is that France and with the backing of Israel objected to this, thought it was too good a deal for Iran. So the real question is which way these next round of talks will go, and whether a deal will be done, or whether in fact there are these divisions that will prevent any further progress. Daniel, let's turn now to another election, this time in Nepal, where they're electing a constituent assembly. What will this involve?
Well, it will involve, first of all, an enormous logistical challenge in a country of 30 million people in a very mountainous region wedged between India and China. And it'll involve lots of protests that have been running in recent weeks, some of them violent, on behalf of mainly breakaway Maoist groups that don't like the fact that the election is happening at all. They think that there should be a broad-based government running the show, rather than an interim administration under the Chief Justice that has been in charge. But the fact is that the mainstream Maoists are one of the main parties that will take part in the polls, one of the four leading groups. In all, there are over 130 parties, so it's going to be a very fragmented affair. And given the fractiousness that's been involved, given the difficulties in reaching agreement on what the constitutional arrangement should be in Nepal, the election will by no means mark the end of the very difficult process. Tom, finally, let's turn to the Bundestag's hearings on American snooping. This is something that has really caused deep upset in the country.
It has, yes. For historical reasons, Germany has always been very touchy about privacy, and things like Google Street View has been hugely controversial there. And so the fact that America has been spying on this country that its ally, that it's been protecting during the Cold War, has aroused enormous anger. In particular, because it turns out that the Americans were tapping Angela Merkel's phone, and Barack Obama actually had to ring up and apologise about this. The Americans have also built a strange structure on the top of their embassy, which is right in the heart of Berlin, which they seem to be using for surveillance of some kind. Der Spiegel says that this is how they are intercepting wireless communication. So there's an enormous amount of anger about this, and so they're having these hearings. The thing is, there's not a great deal they can do. The Germans sent a delegation of intelligence officials to Washington to sort of ask what was going on and to be told about it, and the NSA lived up to its initials and was not saying anything. It refused to confirm or deny that it's done any of these things, and sort of they vaguely agreed to cooperate more closely in future. Edward Snowden, the person whose leaks have led to all of this and who's now hiding in Moscow, has said that he would be prepared to testify, and so a German politician went to visit him to see if that was feasible. The trouble is, if Mr. Snowden goes to Germany, he'll lose his refugee status in Russia, and the Germans can't really grant him asylum, although some politicians would like him to, because to do so they'd have to ignore an extradition order filed by the Americans. So the real problem here is that the Germans actually, although they're very angry with America, do still want to be friends with America. And so I think it's possible that Mr. Snowden will appear by video link, and that would certainly be electrifying. But the most likely outcome here is that there'll be lots of hoo-ha and lots of humping and shouting and screaming, but actually nothing much will really change.
Well, that's our NSA News Stories Ahead for this time. Please join us again next week for another look at the week ahead. From London, this is The Economist.
The Economist.